that all of us would aspire to and live by in country, and that is that we would approach our art with integrity.
Johnny Cash didn't just sing about rebellion, he embodied it. And while the world adored certain bands, the man in black wasn't afraid to call out the phonies, the posers, and the overpolished icons. Some of the names he quietly condemned might leave your jaw on the floor. So, which legendary bands did Johnny Cash really hate? Stick around, because this list might just rewrite what you thought you knew about music legends. Number 1. The Monkees. Imagine a man who bled authenticity, standing in a smoky Nashville bar while the radio played what sounded more like a jingle than a song. That was Johnny Cash's likely reaction when the Monkees came on. Formed in the mid-1960s for a television show, the Monkees were dubbed the Prefab Four, a cheeky nod to the Beatles, but a red flag to someone like Johnny, who valued grit over gloss. They didn't even play their own instruments in the beginning. To Cash, that wasn't just an artistic decision. It was an insult to the craft. Johnny Cash's music was forged in the fires of poverty, prison tours, and personal demons. Every chord was a confession. So when the Monkees exploded onto the charts with choreographed smiles and prepackaged songs, Cash reportedly rolled his eyes. He once referred to some pop acts as processed cheese. And while he didn't name the Monkees directly in that comment, fans and journalists assumed exactly who he meant. Behind the scenes, Cash wasn't one to mince words. During interviews in the late 60s, he expressed frustration that bands like the Monkees were dominating airwaves while genuine storytellers struggled for airtime. "It's all packaging," he said in one rare comment. But no one's listening to the soul anymore. The irony: while Johnny scorned their synthetic origins, the Monkees quietly evolved. Later in their career, they fought to play their own instruments and write their own songs, something that Cash actually respected. In a rare moment of concession, he once admitted that at least they learned what music's really about. But that didn't erase his distaste for their origin story. This wasn't just musical criticism, it was philosophical. To Johnny Cash, music was supposed to hurt a little. It had to mean something. When asked about the Monkees' brand of happy-go-lucky rock, he shrugged and said, "They sing songs. I live them." Number 2. The Sex Pistols. Johnny Cash was no stranger to rebellion. He wore black for the poor, the prisoner, the downtrodden. But when punk rock erupted in the late 70s, Cash wasn't applauding. He saw the Sex Pistols, loud, vulgar, and chaotic, as everything rebellion shouldn't be. Performative, empty, and dangerously shallow. It's easy to assume Cash and the Pistols would have been kindred spirits. After all, both defied establishment norms, stirred controversy, and captured headlines. But while Johnny's rebellion was rooted in compassion and purpose, the Sex Pistols came off like anarchists without a map. "I've seen real pain," Cash once remarked, "and this ain't it." What really irked him? The theatrical nihilism. Sid Vicious smashing things on stage, Johnny Rotten snarling about destroying the monarchy. Cash believed rebellion wasn't about screaming into a mic. It was about speaking uncomfortable truths. In his world, protest music came with stories, with substance. Folsom Prison Blues wasn't a gimmick. It was a window into the life society forgot. The Sex Pistols, in contrast, seemed to be all shock, no soul. Cash reportedly dismissed their music as hollow rage, suggesting it was rebellion for rebellion's sake. In a 1980 backstage conversation, overheard by fellow country artist Chris Christopherson, Cash apparently scoffed at the band's infamous line, "No future for you." His response: "That's because you haven't lived one." But this wasn't about genre snobbery. Johnny Cash admired honesty in any musical form. He praised Bob Dylan, who was once booed for going electric, and even defended rap when others dismissed it. What he couldn't stand was posturing without purpose. And to him, the Sex Pistols were the worst offenders. The deeper message: to Johnny, rebellion had to be earned. You don't get to scream about the world unless you've walked through it. "You sing for the broken," he once said, "not just to break things." Number 3. Led Zeppelin. On the surface, it might seem absurd. Led Zeppelin, titans of rock, musical innovators, and fan-favorite legends. But for Johnny Cash, none of that mattered if the music didn't bleed truth. He respected musicianship, sure, But when that craftsmanship was buried beneath ego, excess, and mysticism, Cash wasn't impressed. And Led Zeppelin, in his eyes, embodied all of it. Cash's problem with Zeppelin wasn't rooted in jealousy or even their fame. It was philosophical. The soaring guitar solos, thunderous drums, and Robert Plant's howling vocals felt theatrical, even indulgent. It's not the volume, Cash once told a friend. It's the void behind it. To Johnny, songs were supposed to be stories, not spells. Zeppelin's lyrics wandered into Tolkien-inspired fantasy and abstract sensuality, far removed from the earthly grit he cherished. Behind the scenes, there was little love lost. During a brief crossing of paths at a music festival in the early 70s, Cash reportedly found their set impressive in noise, empty in meaning. Jimmy Page's virtuosity may have stunned the crowd, but Cash, watching from a distance, remarked that a good guitar doesn't need to scream for attention. And the lifestyle, that's where the distaste deepened. Led Zeppelin epitomized the excesses of rock and roll: private jets, groupies, hotel destruction. Johnny had battled his own demons, but he never glamorized them. To see Zeppelin revel in chaos for the sake of image didn't sit right. "You don't wear rebellion," he once said. "You earn it in scars." Yet what's fascinating is that Cash acknowledged their technical brilliance. In interviews, he didn't deny the band's influence. "They've got power," he said, "but power without compass just burns everything down." He wasn't threatened. He was disappointed. For Cash, music wasn't magic, it was medicine. And Led Zeppelin, as loud and legendary as they were, didn't offer healing. They offered spectacle. In the church of Johnny Cash, there was no room for wizards, only witnesses. Number 4. The Bee Gees. By the time disco took over the charts, Johnny Cash was already feeling alienated by the direction popular music was heading. And nothing symbolized that shift more than the Bee Gees. With their shimmering suits, glossy harmonies, and high-pitched falsettos, they became the face of an era that Johnny never wanted to enter. Cash's distaste wasn't just about sound, it was about sincerity. "You can't cry in falsetto," he once quipped. Whether it was a real quote or one passed around in musician circles, the message was clear. He found the Bee Gees emotionally hollow. While their fans danced under glitter balls, Johnny stared at the darkness in the human soul. The Bee Gees were brilliant songwriters, there's no denying it. But to Cash, their sound was engineered for escapism, not empathy. Where songs spoke to addicts, prisoners, and outlaws, there's catered to disco halls and polyester suits. "They're singing about love," he said, "but it feels like advertising." During the height of Saturday Night Fever, country music faced an identity crisis. Traditional acts were getting pushed out of radio slots by dance hits. Cash, who had spent years building a platform for roots music, saw the Bee Gees and their disco dynasty as the shiny bulldozer flattening authenticity. He reportedly turned down a late 70s TV appearance when he heard they'd be guests. "I don't do sparkle," he told his manager. What's interesting is that the Bee Gees, like Cash, came from a family band background. They had their own share of heartache and reinvention. But in Johnny's eyes, their artistic choices leaned too far toward polish and away from pain. "I don't fault them for making people dance," he admitted. "But not all of us are trying to escape." Ultimately, Cash didn't hate joy. He hated when music stopped being human. The Bee Gees weren't evil. They were just on a different mission. And for a man who lived his music like scripture, disco just didn't make the cut. Number 5. Kiss. Johnny Cash never needed pyrotechnics to command a room. All he needed was a guitar, a story, and that unmistakable voice that sounded like gravel laced with truth. So when a band like Kiss burst onto the scene, faces painted like comic book villains, spitting fire, blood, and confetti, Cash saw it not as innovation, but as a distraction. To him, it wasn't music. It was marketing in a leather jumpsuit. Kiss sold millions of records and packed stadiums, but they represented everything Johnny detested about where rock was heading. The triumph of image over substance. He once joked during a rehearsal, "If I need face paint to sell a song, it ain't a song worth selling." While fans screamed for Gene Simmons' tongue and Ace Frehley's pyrotechnic solos, Cash quietly seethed at what he saw as a betrayal of music's raw purpose. The real clash came down to values. Cash was a storyteller, a man who wrestled with the morality of sin and salvation in every verse. Kiss, on the other hand, made rebellion a party trick. Their lyrics often felt juvenile to him, more about fantasy and fun than reflection or redemption. "You can scream rock and roll all night," he once said, "but what do you do the morning after?" Kiss's massive commercial empire only deepened Cash's scorn. Action figures, lunchboxes, comic books, none of it sat right with a man who grew up in poverty. Picking cotton in Dyess, Arkansas, music had saved his life. Turning it into a toy store? That felt like desecration. And yet, he never publicly trashed them by name. That wasn't his style. But insiders knew. In a private conversation with Merle Haggard, Cash reportedly said, "There's nothing behind the paint." To him, Kiss wasn't evil, they were empty. And emptiness was worse. Johnny Cash believed music should illuminate the soul, not blind the audience. In his mind, Kiss may have set the stage on fire, but they never lit a single heart. Number 6. The Clash. On paper, Johnny Cash and The Clash had a lot in common. Both were rebellious, political, and rejected the establishment. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'd find that Cash saw them as pretenders. Righteous fury packaged for punk fashionistas. To him, The Clash were more theater than threat. The Clash billed themselves as the only band that matters. But to Johnny, that kind of self-proclamation was a red flag. He once remarked, "If you have to say it, it probably ain't true." Their song spoke of revolution and injustice, but Cash questioned the depth of their struggle. "You don't wear rebellion like a jacket," he said. "You carry it in your blood." In Cash's eyes, rebellion wasn't a genre, it was a condition. He had played in prisons. He'd battled addiction. He'd stood before Congress to speak for native rights. The Clash, they played to punk crowds in London, dressed the part, and sang with fury. But Cash wondered who they were really fighting for. "The working man don't need slogans," he once said. "He needs songs that tell his story." That sentiment came to a head when someone asked Cash if he saw himself in bands like The Clash. His reply was cold. "They're trying to sound angry. I'm just trying to survive." It was a stark reminder that to him, the punk movement often mistook volume for vision. The Clash's layered, sometimes contradictory political messages, anti-capitalist, but signed to CBS Records, only added fuel to Cash's quiet disdain. Still, Cash wasn't blind to their influence. He understood their appeal to youth disillusioned with pop. But in a world of overbranded anger, he found their fire more synthetic than sacred. "Being angry is easy," he once said, "but singing about pain, that takes guts." For Johnny, The Clash didn't lack talent, they lacked scars. He didn't hate their noise. He just didn't believe their story. And in his world, the story was everything. To Johnny Cash, music wasn't about charts or costumes. It was about truth, scars, and the stories in between. He didn't hate these bands for their success. He hated what they represented, a detour from authenticity. So whether you agreed or not, Cash always made one thing clear: music should matter. Which name shocked you most on this list? And which artist do you think he would have secretly admired? Drop your thoughts and keep it raw.